The leftist revolution initiated by then Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez in 1999 led to unprecedented social change, including falls in poverty, an expansion of healthcare, and a level of equality unmatched in Latin America. But 17 years later, and 3 years since the death of President Chavez, the country is on course for the highest inflation rate in the world, and the opposition now has a majority in parliament for the first time. So did the so-called Chavez revolution die with Chavez? To debate this, I'm joined by Max Arvelaez, a former advisor to the late president, close confidant to his successor, President Nicolas Maduro, and Venezuela's current ambassador designate to the United States, and John Lee Anderson, a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, who Chavez once called a critical friend, but who said the Chavez revolution never really took place. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me in the arena. Max, let me start with you. Your party, the Socialists, the party created by the late Hugo Chavez, was, for want of a better word, trounced in the parliamentary elections in December in Venezuela. It was the worst ever defeat for your party in its history. Chavez has gone, and so has your popular support, hasn't it?
Well, not exactly. I mean, again, yes, it was a defeat, definitely. But on the other hand, 42% people voted for us, I mean, on that December the 6th. And you should say after 17 years, and I think we had held like 20 elections in 17 years, so it was the first time, that we lost one election. That doesn't mean that this is the end of the Chavismo, or Maduro is still the president, President Maduro is still the president, and now for us is a question to learn from that defeat and to respond to the demand of the people.
John Lee Anderson, you wrote these big profiles of Chavez, you interviewed him, travelled with him. Did the Chavez political, social revolution, did Chavismo die with the man himself?
I felt so at the time that he was dying, and I wrote my last piece on Venezuela. And I mean, I would say that certainly developments since then have borne out that perception, or at least that his legacy has been mismanaged. I felt that, I mean, I never had any doubt when I was with Chavez, who was an incredibly charismatic man. He could make any foe smile. He was someone who had a unique ability with his constituents. But I never was convinced that he had built a really deeply and broad-based revolution.
Wasn't broad-based or deep enough, your quote-unquote revolution?
No, I don't think so. I mean, on the contrary, I think definitely that, because you have to remember where we were 20 years ago, before Chavez was elected. I strongly believe that at that time Venezuela was almost a social and economic apartheid at that time.
But the Chavez social revolution might have been viable and popular in an era in which Venezuela could sell oil at $140 a barrel. Surely it's not viable or popular in an era in which oil is at less than $40 per barrel.
We always said that the oil is like a blessing and a curse for Venezuela. So now our responsibility is to make sure that we're going to try to...
But why now? You had 17 years to diversify away from oil.
Well, tell me one single oil producer country that is doing well right now. It's not easy, and we've been trying to do that. But the difference with the past, that 20 or 30 years ago, we have an amazing oil revenue as well, and it didn't benefit for those who needed it.
You're saying which oil economy is doing well, but which oil economy has declared an economic emergency, as the Venezuelan government declared in January, and you're on course, I think, for a 720% inflation rate, the worst in the world, according to some predictions. We can argue about the exact numbers, but it's bad. Inflation is bad in your country.
IMF, and usually,
the inflation is bad in your country. The growth figures are bad, and your government's declared an economic emergency. You have to own that economic emergency. You've been in power for 17 years.
But what happens? Because the difference with other governments on the right, we want to make sure that to keep to balance the books, we don't want to do that on the back of the poorest and the vulnerables. So the challenge of my government is how we're going to make sure that we can maintain all the social gains for the vast majority of Venezuelan people and to confront this crisis.
As President Maduro said in 2014, there is sufficient evidence of US agencies conspiring to put an end to this revolution to destroy President Chavez. Does he have a point, given there was this coup in 2002, coup attempt, given President Obama said last year that Venezuela is a national security threat to the United States, which seems a bit absurd from where I'm sitting?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the US blundered seriously by, of course, signing off on that coup in the era of Bush back in 2002. It certainly radicalized President Chavez. He told me so himself. We spoke not long afterwards. It deepened his conviction that the U.S. was ultimately conspiring against him. And I think in the age of the so-called war on terror, not only Venezuela, other countries that weren't lumped with some of the Middle Eastern countries felt threatened. And this certainly had that effect with Chavez. It was a fundamental mistake, and he went forward from there.
What is at the core of that disagreement, if we can put it politely?
I mean, on the first day when President Chavez was elected, on that first day he was elected, and even before, you have people, a certain elite in Venezuela and their friends here and there, that we started to destabilize, I mean, to work against us.
You don't think Venezuela has anything to answer for on the when people talk about its democratic credentials, authoritarianism, human rights,
I think,
freedom of protest, freedom of the media?
No, I mean, before and after Chavez, I think that Venezuela is far more democratic than before Chavez, for example, before the Bolivian revolutions.
I didn't know Venezuela before Chavez. I knew Venezuela with Chavez. There were very few political prisoners under Chavez himself. I would say that that's worsened in the last few years. It's deteriorated. I'm critical of the fact that the Maduro government has chosen to imprison people for leading protests on what many people believe to be spurious grounds. I think that has ill-served the image of the Venezuelan government. I think it hasn't helped them here.
Max, do you agree?
I think that a goodwill gesture by the Venezuelan government would be, in fact, to release the people who are considered political prisoners, because, in fact, it's counterproductive in this whole political debate.
Well,
and I think
because you are talking about images but the fact that 2 years ago, in 2014, and definitely a coup was on its way in Venezuela at that moment. Because, you always look at us, but you have to see also the reaction from the opposition. You have some people from the opposition, and maybe a minority, I don't know, but they never accepted Chavez election, and then when President Maduro was elected 3 years ago. So it's very easy that, depending on if it benefits to you, you accept the rule of the games and you decide, okay, let's go for two elections. For example, okay, they went to elections in December and they won. But if not, okay, we go to the street of Caracas, and Venezuela could be the next Ukraine. That was what's going on 2 years ago. And back to the credentials of, definitely for me, I like to compare Venezuela, I mean, what we went through in Venezuela in the last 10 years, a bit like the civil rights movements in the 60s here in the United States, in the sense that it was a process, and it's still a process of political inclusion, where these people that were regarded as second-rank citizens, for the first time they become full citizens. And you have a reaction from a tiny minority of people that they cannot accept that. And from time to time they looked at Europe and the US to get some help.
That's fair?
I would say to a degree it's true. I mean, again, my criticism has been that it was badly implemented. I mean, you have a country effectively without effective institutions. Now, how that came about, I don't know. But it's certainly worsened in the last X number of years. And I believe that the language of confrontation is not proper for a head of state. I think when Chavez,
the language of confrontation?
No, I mean,
I think it's counterproductive, and it polarizes, and it creates even more fervid opposition.
Can the social advances, and there were definite social advances in the Chavez period, I think even critics would accept, can they be guaranteed going forward, or will they all be undone, either through government incompetence or through another party taking over the government and reversing them? Can they be guaranteed? First John Lee and then Max to finish.
Can they be guaranteed on what ground, in which...
Do you think, prediction-wise, do you think the gains that were made will be undone in the years going forward because of where we are now?
Well, in a sense, it's being eroded now. I mean, life is not as good as it was a few years ago. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, there's now a lot of insecurity, food queues, and all of that. I would hope so. I mean, I think this is the same, in effect, this is the same challenge that governments face everywhere. Cuba faces it as it institutes these economic changes going forward. Will the social cradle be there for the Cubans of the future? I think this is the same question, and this should be the bottom line for any Venezuelan involved in politics, whether it's the government today or the opposition coming forward. You cannot take things away from people if they're used to it. If you have a large population living in extreme poverty who are used to receiving some basic stipend whereby they know that they're not going to starve that month and their children can go to school, it is essential that that be guaranteed.
And in an age of falling oil prices, you can't guarantee that to your people, can you?
We will make sure that we can manage to guarantee them. Because you have to remember, when Chavez was elected, 17% of the Venezuelan population were living on extreme poverty. Now, less than 5%. Last year, it fell on less than 5%. What I mean that, and already things were quite difficult on the economic front. But what I mean, yes. And if that's, now we got the opportunity to show to the people, how we're going to respond to their demands and to make sure that the Bolivarian Revolution keep going.
Okay, gentlemen, thanks for joining me in the arena. We'll have to leave it there. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.